What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to attempt to address some worldview issues as they relate to evolution. But I'm going to base what I'm saying on a documentary that is going to be released on October the 17th. It's called Evolution's Achilles' Heels. I think it's one of the most significant things we've ever done, and it has absorbed the better part of my life for the last 3 years. I didn't know when I proposed this idea that I was going to become a film editor and scorekeeper and all sorts of things that has to go into doing a movie, but I'm very excited about it, and I'm going to show you a lot of clips that are going to appear in this documentary. We have, at last count, 6 copies of the book Evolution's Achilles' Heels on the tables over there, and of course the book is just a lot more detailed than a movie can produce. But essentially, we did this. We went around, we asked a bunch of PhD scientists, what are the Achilles' heels of evolutionary theory? According to your area of expertise, what can evolution not answer? What are the hardest questions we could possibly ask evolutionists? And so this is not an apologetic for the Bible or for creation, which is what a CMI mostly does. This is putting the ball in the enemy's camp and say, okay, now let's play. It was a lot of fun doing this. But we don't just do documentaries. This is our second major documentary that we're producing. We have a gigantic website called creation.com. I believe we have 8,000 articles on our website now, and every week we have 3 or 4 brand new articles that appear on it. We also produce Creation Magazine. We've been doing this for 37 years now. In fact, I think that this is what God used to keep me in Christianity when I was 18 and 19 years old. This has had a profound, I can't believe I get to work for CMI. I'm a second-generation CMI scientist. The men who were writing this when I was in college, they're all 70 and 80 years old and retiring. And so here I am, I'm the new kid on the block. I'm 45 years old, but I'm a youngster, and I stand on the shoulder of giants. We have a very important information tunnel that we throw tons of information at our folks. In fact, in our email newsletter, what we do is once a week, we'll identify something really interesting in the world of science, some hot topic, or something just encouraging or informative or exciting, something designed to help you answer your questions and something designed to help you be a better witness. It comes out once a week. While I'm speaking, there's going to be some forms that go around. You don't have to sign up, no big deal. But just in case you're interested, just kind of circulate them around and get them back to here when we're finished. All right. Nope, skip, here. Picture of the book. I cannot be more excited about this. We are getting rave reviews over the book, and for the Christian organizations that have watched the documentary, we've got excellent reviews. Who didn't give us a good review was richarddawkins.net, and we got about 9,000 dislikes on YouTube, and we wear that with honor. As I said, we have a lot of PhD scientists associated with CMI. Most of the men in this picture are our speakers. A couple outside guys that we brought in for their expertise so they could weigh in on these topics. Natural selection, the center point of evolutionary theory. Genetics, my specialty. The origin of life that must happen for evolution to happen. The fossil record that should reflect evolutionary history. The geologic record that should reflect deep time. Radiometric dating, as we all know, is claimed to give us evidence of millions and billions of years. And then cosmology, focusing on Big Bang. And then we wrap up the book in the documentary with a long section on evolutionary ethics. Now, I'm going to skip over so much stuff just for this hour presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just focus on the first 3. And the other ones, I'll just leave it up to you because I just don't have time. There's too much awesome stuff. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to throw in some illustrations of how to understand these subjects. So let's start off with this one, 2 different worlds. The world of evolution and the world of creation. Charles Darwin tried to do this. What he did was he set up 2 opposing viewpoints, evolution and creation. And he said something like this: everything I find that supports evolutionary theory disproves the other theory. Is that true? Actually, absolutely not. And it was a rhetorical trick that Darwin used because this is reality. These two views overlap significantly. There are tons of things that both sides claim as evidence. Let me give you an example. I was at a conference in Kansas City about a year and a half ago. And the conference was called to analyze a video that PBS had produced, and they had shown in public school classrooms all over the country that year. And it mocked Christianity, outwardly. And so the question was this a religiously neutral presentation? Because the Supreme Court has ruled that all instruction must be religiously neutral. And it was not religiously neutral, therefore they should not have shown it. And yet, on the other hand, I'm watching this documentary and I realize that every single bit of information that they used to support evolutionary theory, I agreed with. What? So in essence, what they did was they gave the student what I call non-discriminating information. Information a student cannot use to decide which theory might be right or wrong. What they did was say, look at all this information. All this stuff fits in evolutionary theory, therefore evolutionary theory must be true. But all the information they gave also fits in creation theory, creationism, creation science, biblical ideas. And so what we have to do, if we really want to understand this argument, we've got to get out there. We have to get to where the two theories do not overlap. And that's what I'm about to do. I'm going to attempt to do. On the first topic is natural selection. So when I say natural selection, what do you think? Survival of the fittest? What else? Live and die? Things struggling with their environment? Yeah, I hear it out there, but I can't quite hear it. So here's what natural selection is. First of all, it's not magic. It's not like the environment or nature can actually do any thinking of its own. That would be silly. No one in science, not Darwin, no one ever meant that natural selection meant that nature was an active agent doing any thinking. So let's get that out of the way. Natural selection is also not survival of the fittest. That's a really horrible term, because who's the most fit? Is it the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the one with the best eyesight, the smartest, the one with the best camouflage? How do you define fitness? It actually has a very specific definition. It's he who has the most number of children in succeeding generations is by definition the most fit. You don't have to die or live. You can actually die while being the most fit, which is why praying mantis ladies, they turn their head around and they bite off the head of the male, because it makes things happen in the male that gives them a reproductive advantage. Or you can not die. So I said that backwards. You can die in the process of it, or you cannot die. For instance, picture some oak trees in a forest. And the forest has some wet areas and some dry areas. And one of the types of oak trees, or even within the same species, some of those individuals reproduce very well with wet roots, and some of them reproduce very well with dry roots. Over time, what do you think is going to happen in the wet areas and the dry areas? Do you think maybe you're going to get more trees in the wet areas that can handle the wet conditions and more trees in the dry areas that can handle the dry conditions? It's not about life and death. It's he who produces the most acorns. Oh. So the phrase we should use is differential reproduction. That's what natural selection means. Darwin used a bad term. He said some people call it survival of the fittest. That's not really a good term. It's not about survival. It's about reproduction. It's reproduction of the fittest. And yet they've used these mushy definitions for the last 150 years, and people are really confused about what it means. Let me give you an example. Take these two dogs. The dogs are what's called heterozygous. They have two different traits for coat length, long and short, here represented by L and S. So as they start having puppies, the puppies are going to get one coat length gene from the mother and one coat length gene from the father, and you might get puppies with two long genes, or a long gene and a short gene, or a short gene and a short gene. Why are those X'd out? Because these actually live in the far north. And a horribly brutal winter comes in. And the dogs that don't have long fur die. Who survives? Those dogs right there. And all you have now is a population where every single individual has long fur because the short-furred ones get weeded out. So it's an example of death leading to natural selection. Okay, but you see, first of all, the gene for hair length was already in the population. Nothing new has been created. But second of all, we call it natural because it's something that happens randomly or something that happens according to the environment. So really what it is if you take the individual and you add the environment, who has the most babies? Now, I'm beating this up like a dead horse. Do I have to say it again? Yeah, I do have to say it again? All right. I'm not going to say it again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up a couple more times so you can see what I mean. But Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species, right? What's a species? Darwin never defined it. He said, I was struck by how vague and arbitrary the distinction between species actually is. What's a species? And how do we talk about the origin of species unless we can define it? Oh, what a terrible term to define. We now have examples of all these different species that can interbreed. We have zonkies and zorses. We have corn snakes and king snakes, which are different genera. Donkeys, horses, and zebras are in the same genus, Equus. King snakes and corn snakes, the evolutionists put them in different genera. We have, in the Waikiki Aquarium on the bottom left there, they had a false killer whale in the same tank as a bottlenose dolphin. And what a shock, because the false killer whale got pregnant and gave birth to a half false killer whale, half dolphin. And then that animal interbred with another bottlenose dolphin, and that animal that you see in the picture is 3/4 bottlenose dolphin and 1/4 false killer whale. What's a species, I ask again? Remember in biology class when you learned that if two things can reproduce, we call those one species, right? So cats and dogs are different species, but lions and tigers are the same species. Dogs, gray wolves, red wolves, coyotes, Australian dingoes, and African jackals are one species. We give them different species names because it's convenient. Okay, now what does the word mean in Latin, specie? It means type. Bankers talk about specie of money, coins and bills, different types of money. It just means type, so it's a convenient term. And a big problem we have in science is that biologists talk about what can reproduce. That's where their species line is. But geologists, those things are dead. You can't reproduce them. A geologist says, look at these two forms in the fossil record. They look different, therefore they're different species. But do you see the problem? They can't actually know. And if you consider that Chihuahuas and Great Danes are definitely the same species, you realize what the problem is. But natural selection is also not evolution. I've seen several times where an evolutionist, I'll talk about natural selection. Oh, then you agree with evolution. No, I'm talking about natural selection, not evolution. The same way where an evolutionist might define evolution as change over time. When you start talking, oh, look how this species, Chihuahuas were not here 200 years ago, right? The dog kind has changed. We did it, but it still has changed. If you start talking about change over time, they say, oh, you're an evolutionist then, you believe in change over time. No, nonsense. Because evolution must contain the phrase common ancestry. Creationists like Edward Blythe were writing about natural selection. He was a special creationist. I don't know if he was a young earth creationist, but he was certainly one. He definitely believed the Bible. And he wrote a series of papers when Darwin was a young man. While Darwin was sailing around the world right after he got out of college, this man wrote 3 papers in a very popular journal. We know Darwin read this journal because some of his friends published in this journal. And he had a fully formed views of natural selection. But in his mind, natural selection was that which preserved a species. By getting rid of the misfits and the mutants, it allowed a species to survive. Darwin took that kind of an idea and he said, oh, and then he said this, I see no limit to the amount of change. Do you see what he did? We notice change. Everyone, creationists, evolutionists, they're agreeing with change. Darwin said there's no limit to it. But that's a philosophical idea, isn't it? Because he didn't have proof that there's no limits. Darwin didn't even know how genes were passed from one generation to the next. He knew nothing about genetics, which is our next section. He didn't know what controlled shape and form and behavior. So natural selection is not evolution. Evolution must involve common ancestry, and that is exactly what it can't prove. And when we look at examples of natural selection, here are two bacteria. One is mutant. You can see it's mutant. But when you zoom up on it, there's a pore in the bacterial cells. The non-mutant one allows the food particles to get in and allows those purple antibiotics to get in. But on the right, the antibiotic bounces off. So in an environment with antibiotic, who survives? The mutant, the one that doesn't grow fast, the one that's half dead because it can hardly eat. That's the one that lives. Wait a minute. Is that an example of molecules to man evolution? Is that an example of onward and upward, increasing complexity over time? No, it's an example of something breaking. And as we have seen in the evolutionary literature, every example that I am aware of positive selection deals with selection for a broken gene. Let me give you another example. In Central Africa, there is a horrible, horrible, horrible disease called sickle cell anemia. Called malaria. And malaria kills many, many people. It's terrible. Well, a trait called sickle cell anemia has arisen in the Central African population. It is a broken gene. There's an amino acid change in that gene that causes hemoglobin to crystallize, leading to pain and bleeding and suffering amongst the people who carry it. But you know what? The crystallization tears apart the malaria parasite. So the people that are carrier of the sickle cell gene, they can survive where the people who don't carry it die. It is much better to be able to survive long enough to have children than to be dead. It's another example of natural selection acting upon something that's broken, because it's a lot easier to break something than to invent a brand new gene, which would take millions of years. And that's an idea that you can find in the book back here called Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, written by a dear friend of mine. I've worked with Dr. Sanford for 8 years now. We have published several papers together. In fact, our last paper that we published together was this one, 2012. What we did was we looked at 95 years worth of human H1N1 influenza, because we have sequences, gene sequences going back to people who died in 1918. They've sequenced the flu out of some of those cadavers. Ugh. And what we did is we said, if natural selection actually works, you should not see an increase in the mutation count over time. And that's exactly what that upper level line is. Over time, from 1918 till 2009, the H1N1 picked up over 1,400 mutations. Now, let me explain something here. The human immune system is at war with the flu. The only flu viruses that can propagate and infect the next person are the ones that can escape the human immune system. That is called natural selection. And yet, natural selection is unable to prevent the accumulation of 1,400 mutations. That was over 12% of his genome. And then in 2009, the human H1N1 virus went extinct. It had been circulating since World War I. And it went extinct when the swine, remember the pig flu virus, the swine flu virus of 2009? Remember that big news? When it appeared, so many people caught it that essentially it inoculated humanity against the human version. And it was already decrepit because it had fallen apart, it had been so mutated, and it died. Interestingly, this many generations of influenza is about the same number of generations as the evolutionists believe goes back to the human and chimpanzee common ancestor 6 million years ago. Natural selection is unable to prevent genetic decay, and that is absolutely opposite to what Darwinism requires. So I claim that natural selection cannot remove most mutations from a population. We have lots of evidence for that. It doesn't add anything new. It can only operate on what's already there. It doesn't prevent extinction and is not what Darwin needed. Now, is that all over? Is that okay, or is that like over your head? Some people are nodding, yeah, that's awesome. Other people are like, oh, wow, what do you do with that? All right, let's step down a little bit. Let me give you another interesting example. What is science? What is science? Is it a way of explaining how things work? How about this for an interesting definition? Science is an interpretive filter of reality. So reality is these vertical red bars. Science is an approach to reality, trying to figure out how things work. Can you see that if your filter is wrong, you still might get some things correct? Can you see that? I believe absolutely evolution absolutely does make some predictions, and those predictions are absolutely correct. But I think evolution is actually completely wrong, even though it does get a couple of things right. What does it get right? It gets right that overlap zone. What it gets wrong, the Achilles heels, natural selection, genetics, the origin of life, those sorts of questions. Now, I am not claiming I have a perfect filter. I would never do that. There's plenty of things I do not get. My biblical knowledge is not 100%. And even if I believe the Bible is the Word of God, which I absolutely do, and I absolutely believe the history in Genesis, I'm not saying I'm 100% right. However, if you line up your filter more closely to reality, you will understand more. And I think actually creationism explains a lot more than evolution does. And think about the origins of modern science. You cannot make a list of the early modern scientists without making a list of people who believe the Bible. Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, Faraday, Pasteur. I mean, on and on and on. Johann Kepler. He gave us the 3 laws of planetary motion. He said of his work, it was like thinking God's thoughts after him. Newton, who invented calculus, gave us Newton's laws of motion. He wrote more about theology than he did about science. What's going on here? How come middle Christianity and early science go hand in hand? There's 2 reasons for that. 1, Christianity demands logic. And so does science. But 2, these early scientists believed that God was upholding the universe in a constant manner. Because the Bible describes not only an all-powerful creative genius God, but a God who does not change. You must realize early science was developed on a theological presupposition of the biblical definition of God. And science owes a tremendous debt to Christianity. In fact, secular historians have noted this very strongly. And yet, most of them don't really want to talk about it because it's a little bit embarrassing. And inside the cell, oh my, there's so much complexity. Inside your cell, you actually have a post office. There's these little molecules called kinesins, these little walking sticks. And they pull vesicles around with them, and they go to specified destinations in the cell. You could not exist like this. Like when you stub your toe, it's because a kinesin molecule pulled a vesicle full of neurotransmitters from your spine all the way down your nerve, all the way to your big toe. It took weeks to get there. The inside of the cell is so unbelievably complicated. Darwinism has a big problem with that, because the more complicated life becomes, the harder evolution the more difficult it is for evolution to explain it. If life is simple, piece of cake. If life is complex, uh-oh. And what has the modern scientific revolution showed us over the last couple of years? That life is complex. So let's move quickly into genetics as I swamp you with tons of information. Now, I am a geneticist. I know that I am a marine biologist, and some people have other words for marine biologists. Yes, I got that. But while I was having fun in Florida, I ended up in the genetics lab. And while I was studying these animals, these corals, I stole the genes that code for those bright green and bright red pigments. And those genes were engineered into fish. So yeah, I've made the Frankenfish. Part of my background is in genetic engineering. Like it or not, that was my background. And you know what? This is actually fun. But the father of genetics was a man named Gregor Mendel. He was a Catholic priest and monk. He ran his monastery. After all, he's extremely well educated. Extreme. He's a very brilliant man. He went through all these different science classes, all these different universities, ended up as a priest running a monastery, which before he became the head of the monastery, he had lots of time for experimenting. And he's experimenting in the monastery garden, and he very carefully and very determinedly worked out the laws of genetics and published those laws 6 years after Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. Now, the common theory is that Mendel was forgotten about, unnoticed. He published in German. Yeah, but we know Darwin read that journal. There are over 100 references to Mendel's works before they were supposedly rediscovered in the 1900s. But people said stuff, hey, how about that Mendel guy? I don't know what to do with him. Why? Because Charles Darwin needed life to be infinitely variable. He needed natural selection to be able to do anything. Mendel said, tall or short, purple or white, green or yellow, wrinkled or smooth. And as those alleles are getting scrambled every generation, the pea plants that are born to the parent pea plants, they have a random combination of those things. And yeah, you can get all this change over time, but the change is only based on the alleles that are already present. And that contradicted Darwinism. So they pushed them off to the side for 60 years until look, mutations. And when they invented mutations, when they discovered mutations, now they had a way to explain Mendel's laws, and they brought them back into science. And this is what happened. When we look at the confidence of Darwinists, throughout the 19th century, the 20th century, they waxed supreme. The confidence amongst the people who believed in Darwinian processes was so very strong. There's a little dip right there. You know what that is? That's the 1925 Scopes monkey trial. But you see when it starts falling off the cliff? That's the 1950s. That's when population geneticists started applying mathematics to evolution. And J.B.S. Haldane came up with the famous Haldane's dilemma, which is still unanswered. He said, there has not been enough time, even in the millions of years to separate something like humans from chimpanzees, to drive the differences, between humans and chimpanzees. And then, over the last decade, 15 years, the complexity of life has skyrocketed, and the power of Darwinism to explain that life has plummeted. I really like being in this position today. I am so glad I didn't grow up in the 1950s. I don't know how some of you people did it. I crave answers. And back then, I don't know what I would have done. Maybe I would have turned to one of the alternate explanations like gap theory or something like that. And I wouldn't have been satisfied with it because I knew it would have been contradictory to the Bible. What else would I have said? Today I can say, no. Darwinian evolution does not work. Talk about complexity. Okay, go. Oh, good. Within the genome, there are these little molecules called ribosomes. No, sorry, this is a polymerase. This polymerase scoots down the DNA and manufactures RNA. But in a lot of places in the cell, you can make different RNAs from the same piece of DNA with different starting and ending points. In fact, your average letter in the genome is incorporated into 6 different RNA molecules. Meaning if you change that one letter, you might change your height, your eye color, your ability to tolerate garlic, and whether or not you can see in the dark. I just made stuff up. If one letter is incorporated into multiple different RNAs that have very different functions, that if you change the letter, how does natural selection handle that? How does natural selection select for one thing when something else is operating in the other direction? Overlapping codes are so prevalent in the genome that Darwinists are running scared from them. They don't even want to admit it most of the time that they exist. Because polyfunctional DNA cannot evolve. Multiple functions prevent selection, efficient selection. It confounds selection. And a code that has more than one message requires intelligence to produce. You try it. Write a sentence where if you start in the 5th letter, you come up with a completely different sentence. Good luck. Now do it randomly. You'll be here till the end of the universe and never come up with a coherent sentence that you can skip a couple letters and come up with a brand new sentence. It won't happen. But genetics gives us other information. It's even worse. When you started off as a single cell in your mother, you started dividing. But those little machines that copy your DNA, they're amazing, but they do make about a mistake every billion letters. And since you have more than a billion letters in every cell, every time your cells divide, you add about 1 to 3 new mutations. You have about 100 trillion cells in your body, meaning every single possible mutation exists in you right now. And the older you get, the more mutations you accumulate. That is what kills us, is mutation accumulation. We cannot stop it. We are doomed. Human life is constrained by mutations. It is estimated that a 50-year-old person, every skin cell and every cell in the intestinal tract has 40,000 mutations that they were not born with. That's what kills us. But happily, those skin cells aren't passed on to the next generation. The reproductive cells are treated differently. And yet, when we count up the number of mutations that occur from one generation to the next, it's approximately 100 mutations per generation. So if you start off with my great-great-great-grandfather to my great-great-grandfather, those really are, this is not. But every generation, you add about another 100 mutations. What happens over time in that situation? Well, eventually, humanity will go extinct. This is genetics, operating in the opposite direction that Darwin required. Now think about it. Darwin did not know how traits are passed from one generation to the next. He invented evolutionary theory in a vacuum, an absolute vacuum of knowledge. And now that we have all this knowledge, we can actually reflect back upon Darwin's theory and say, it doesn't work. Because not only do we know from genetics that mutations will kill us as individuals, but they're also going to kill our species. Just like the influenza virus went extinct, every species should be going extinct. And that is sad, but it's also wonderful for the Bible, because that means that species could not have been on this earth for millions of years. Isn't that cool? Modern genetics says millions of years doesn't work. Yeah, let's skip over that. I'm going to run out of time if I do that. Skip over that. Here. Last video for the section. Is that going to work? Go. Oh, come on. Go. Oh, it's a wonderful video. If I do that, go. All right, I'll skip over it. Sorry, my computer is 4 years old, and I am desperately trying to get it to work with videos. I did pretty good so far, but I'll skip over the complicated ones. All right. That is a summary for that. I'm going to skip over that too, because I want to talk about my last subject in the next 8 minutes. Oh, no, I have 15 minutes. Excellent. The origin of life. For Darwinism to be true, life must have started somewhere, right? Notice in my talk, a lot of times I have melded two different ideas. One of them is called naturalism. The other one is called evolution. I just called evolution Darwinism. And the reason I used naturalism and evolution at the same time is because evolutionists always do that also. But naturalism is a philosophy. It's a philosophy. It's a belief that natural processes can explain everything that's ever occurred in the universe. And if naturalism is true, that's where the Big Bang comes from, because you've got to explain the universe somehow. But if naturalism is true, there must have been an origin of life. period. Now, evolution say, the origin of life isn't evolution. Evolution talks about change in species over time. Well, no, Mr. Evolutionist, you must believe that life came from somewhere, or else my God created it. So now let's talk about where life came from, shall we? You've all seen the Miller-Urey setup, right? Where you have gases circulating and a spark. What was produced in this in the 1950s? What was produced in that experiment? Was that proof of the origin of life? Did it really build molecules at random that life depends upon? Yes or no? Who says yes? Who says no? Actually, I say yes. It did build molecules that life depended upon. It just didn't build the right molecules, the right amounts, in the right conditions. It built a couple of simple amino acids. It didn't make complicated amino acids. In fact, there are some amino acids that take incredibly sophisticated chemical apparatuses and PhD scientists to make. It did not make nucleotides. It did not make long molecules. Long molecules are required for life, not short molecules. Essentially, what Miller-Urey told us is that random chemical reactions create random chemicals. And then those random chemicals are rapidly destroyed by other random chemicals. And most of what they produced was a brown tar. Life is not tar. Life requires very specific molecules. And life is crazy complicated. This machine right here is called the ATP synthase molecule. Where's my cursor? Go. No, my videos aren't working. So sad. That is the ATP synthase molecule. What it does is it spins. It spins really quickly. And it manufactures a substance called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. ATP does not exist in nature. Phosphate doesn't exist in nature. It gets bonded to metal ions and precipitates out a solution. So we have this adenosine, which can't be manufactured in the original life situation. Phosphates, which you don't find free in the water column. They have to be bonded together into this energy-rich molecule that does not exist in nature. Well, if it doesn't exist in nature and natural processes don't produce it, why did life decide to use ATP to live? Your body manufactures about your weight of ATP every day, and that is the molecule that is used to power all of your cellular processes. The funny thing is, the ATP synthase motor is a protein that requires ATP to produce it. Got that? Which came first, the ATP or the motor to produce the ATP? That's called the chicken and egg problem. And the origin of life is full of chicken and egg problems. Tons and tons and tons of them. Other problems that it has, things like you don't get long chains like this. You don't get chains of the same exact molecule chaining up. You require long chains for life, but this is not a realistic situation. Because any chemist, any polymer chemist will tell you if you want to polymerize something, you have to get rid of the water. Because look what water does. Water breaks down these bonds faster than we can form them. And yet life supposedly evolved in a primordial soup, right? But the soup must have had no water, which is not possible. Worse than that, life requires information. The simplest bacterium that we know about is an internal parasite. It has to live inside another cell. And that bacterium has 580,000 letters in its genome. And they didn't come about randomly. That information has to be placed in a certain order or else the bacteria cannot work. And if that information gets scrambled, the bacteria is going to die. And so knowing all of this, Darwinists have turned to several out clauses. One of them is called panspermia. Maybe the universe is full of life that evolved elsewhere and it was just seeded randomly to Earth. Maybe it came down as a comet with some living particles in it, and the comet splashed into some pond or primordial ocean and brought bacteria to Earth, and now we have life. What's that called? That's called the God of the Gaps argument. If I said something like that, the evolutionists would laugh at me. And so after we say, look, origin of life is not tenable, what are you going to say, Mr. Evolutionist? Oh, maybe the universe happened, maybe life happened somewhere else. Okay, see what happens here? I am arguing experimental science. And someone who believes in panspermia is arguing the great oblong blur in the sky took care of my problem. I think that's kind of funny that way. But some Darwinists, some evolutionists, some people think that maybe life was intentionally seeded here. Maybe aliens brought life to Earth. Because you see, if different parts of the universe are billions of years older than different parts, life could evolve billions of years ago somewhere else in the galaxy or even the universe. And they brought it here. Is that possible? Okay, let's talk about it. If that actually happened, you know what that means? That means the person who believes in what's called directed panspermia believes in intelligent design. They're admitting that evolution is not possible here on Earth, so an intelligent designer must have brought it here. Man, that makes them uncomfortable. In fact, if you actually said that to someone, I predict they're going to get very mad at you. Because, of course, they don't believe in intelligent design. And, of course, they don't believe in a God of the gaps or Darwin of the gaps. They must believe that the origin of life happened and that it is possible for the origin of life to occur. And if it didn't happen, or could not have happened, evolutionary naturalism cannot explain life. Guess what? Perhaps the God of the Bible actually created it just like the Bible says. I predict your conversation will never get that far. Now, I know I was trying not to be sarcastic in here. I was trying to be confident. Because sarcasm does not fly in these conversations. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you, for a reason of the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." Harsh facts shouted in anger with sarcasm don't point people toward the cross. But a gentle answer, even, hey, Mr. Evolutionist, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but I think I read that once in his book called Evolution's Achilles Heels or on his website called creation.com. I'm going to go look it up, and I'm going to come back tomorrow, and we're going to keep talking. That is a fine answer. Absolutely perfectly acceptable for a couple of reasons. One, you can't be expected to know everything. And I'm caught flat-footed all the time. I don't know everything. I try hard, but man, this stuff, I don't have any answer. But you know what? Let me go refresh myself and I'll come back. But two, they don't expect you to come back. They expect you to lose your faith and run away squealing like a little baby pig. And when you come back with confidence, say, okay, you know what? And humility. I'm not an expert on this, but have you ever thought of this? You know why I know that's a powerful way of arguing? Because the person who first witnessed to me that the Bible is history, I was a very much full of myself young man who was thoroughly convinced of evolution. My Christianity was crumbling faster than anything. And that lady, who didn't know anything about science, stood there as I said, oh, come on, face it, evolution's a fact. And I said this and this and this and this. And she goes, oh, yeah, okay, sure. I know I don't have an answer for that or that. And finally I said one thing too many. It was about Pachycetus, the walking whale, the perfect transition between land animals and water animals. And she goes, oh, don't you know they just found the rest of the skeleton? Pachycetus wasn't transitional. It was a 6-foot-long rat. It wasn't the fact that she had an answer. It was the fact that she defended the Bible that burned a hole in my heart. And from that moment on, I changed. And I said, wait a minute. Maybe the Bible's got a lot more answers than I thought. You can do this. A great way to help you do this, I'm going to suggest Creation Magazine. Soon after this, someone drugged me to see a creation speaker, and I didn't want to go to see this creation speaker. But I went to see this creation speaker, and I dropped $20, in which I didn't have a lot of money when I was a college student. Oh, man, that hurt. But I got Creation Magazine, and I think that God let me study myself into Christianity. I read articles over the years about carbon dating. Did you know that carbon dating is a creationist's best friend? Thank you, Mr. Evolutionist, for inventing that, but we'll take that now. You can go play with something else. What do I mean? I mean, we cannot find a carbon source on Earth that has 0 carbon-14. This wood right here has carbon-14 in it. Okay, but you know, after 70 or 80,000 years, there will be 0 carbon-14. This plastic on my computer and covering this cord right here, that came out of oil in the ground. It has carbon-14 in it. That means the oil cannot be millions of years old. Dinosaur bones, diamonds, limestone, all these carbon sources, we can't find any carbon without carbon-14, therefore no carbon source on Earth can be millions of years old. I learned that in Creation magazine. I've read articles about climate change. But you know, in this whole global warming debate, I always point people back to Noah's flood. Because the reason people are afraid of global warming is that they don't have a way to explain the Ice Age. You see, in evolutionary theory, we have the Earth being millions of years old, and the Earth wobbles on its axis a little bit over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. And that changes, it's called the Milankovitch cycle. It changes the amount of sunlight impinged in the Earth by a few percent. And that little change has to create a gigantic change in the environment. Therefore, if you pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, oh my, it might cause a giant change. But wait a minute, the single greatest episode of climate change in Earth history was Noah's flood. Noah's flood, the heat from Noah's flood is that which caused all the evaporation to produce all the snow that led to all the ice. It lasted for a few hundred years and it was finished. And it's not going to happen again because we don't have enough heat to evaporate the water. Go to creation.com, type in Ice Age. There'll probably be 20 articles for you to read on the subject. It's a lot of fun. But I also read articles about why species change. And now I can talk about it without being an evolutionist, because of course species change. You know why species change? Because our brilliant creator genius God put into his creation the ability to adapt to new environments. And if he hadn't have done that, most living species would now be extinct. God is brilliant. If you like Creation magazine, there's a kids section in every edition also. If you like Creation magazine, we have to mail it to you. Our sign-up form looks like this. We need an address. You can go to the tables back there and get checked out. Notice there's a couple of check boxes there. Let me explain it to everyone just before I get down, or before we go to Q&A. The check boxes, there's 4 of them. You can get it for 1 year or 3 years. A 1-year subscription, it comes out 4 times a year. We'll give you a free back issue right here. They're on the tables back there. We think that's a nice gift. For a 3-year subscription, we'll give you a free back issue and then your choice of several DVDs. And that is either Mitochondrial Eve and the 3 Daughters of Noah. I gave this talk twice this week in different places around here. It's my introductory talk on genetics. And here I am as a geneticist, and I'm saying there's abundant evidence for Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, and the Tower of Babel in the human genome. That was a lot of fun. But you can also get the high-tech cell. The high-tech cell is my favoriteest talk I've ever given in my entire life. Here I am trying to describe how the human genome works, and no one understands how the human genome works. And I am claiming here that this is the most complex computer information system in the entire universe, and it works in 4 dimensions, including space 3-dimensionally and time as it changes shape and as the sequence rewrites itself over time. You can get a copy of the Alternative Creations Competitive Edge, which is my introductory talk on creationism, or a copy of our last documentary. We spent a little over $1 million on this. We did this in honor of Darwin's 200th birthday, and what we did was we went all over the world, and we chased down Darwin where he went, and we filmed stuff, and then we went to evolutionists and said, hey, evolutionists, what do you think about what Darwin said about this thing over here? And man, they said the most incredible things. We hired sailing ships and actors, and we put them in period costumes, and it's not a polemic against Darwin. It's as neutral a proposition as we could possibly do, and we're just simply trying to say, this is the man that started it. What do you think about him? After the magazine, I would say our most important book is the Creation Answers book. Take a look at it on our tables back there. It's that red book. It's going to answer 99% of your questions. In fact, the questions you're about to ask me are probably in the Creation Answers book. And we did it on purpose so that you could get a copy of it and have your questions right there. Nice guide. You don't even have to read it. You could look in the index for your question and then go read the answer. We also have some packs of books. This one comes with the Refuting Evolution book, which is the #1 best-selling creation evolution book ever. It's a little book, and it uses 8th grade science to refute a list of evidences that the National Academy of Sciences put together. It's a cool book, and the pack comes with a DVD. Of course, there's Evolution's Achilles' Heels. If they're gone here, you can order from our website. And on October the 17th, our documentary, 96 minutes, powerful. In fact, my boss, Gary Bates, who has been involved in this project from day one as a co-producer and co-director, when we finally finished the movie and we sat down in the office to watch it, at the end, he had tears in his eyes because the whole argument led directly into a gospel presentation from PhD scientists telling them what God has done in their life. It's an amazing and powerful documentary. You might be interested in genetic entropy and the mystery of the genome. I know there's a couple of copies of this back there still. An amazing book. I remember reading this for the first time, and I was stunned because I wasn't taught this in graduate school. And yet it was right there. I could have found it, but I never thought of looking at all these papers that I even had some of them. But Dr. Sanford opened my eyes to some stark realities that evolution mathematically does not work. Or maybe this book. I've got a whole bunch of these. This has been flying off our shelves. Christianity for Skeptics. I think the title speaks for itself. Now, all that said, as I read 1 Peter 3:15 earlier, be ready always to give a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that is within you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. We have more information on this topic, on these biblical topics, than any other time in church history. We should be shouting this from the rooftops, but most people in American culture have never heard anyone defend the Bible. I had gone to church all of my life, and I was 19 years old before I first ran into that crazy lady. And then I ran into somebody else and somebody else after that. God was very merciful to me because I know most people never hear it. There's one of me. How many of you are there? There's probably, 50, 60, 75 people in this room. I can't count them. So if there's that many of us, how many people do you think we know collectively that are not Christians? And what kind of an impact might we have on the kingdom if collectively we all talk to one person this week who's not a Christian with some new bit of information that we might have just used? Do you think possibly God might be able to use that to slowly draw people into his kingdom? I believe so, and that's why CMI exists. We exist to give you answers to your questions, so that you'll be more confident as you go out and share your faith. You think you can do that? I think so too. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for giving us this awesome and amazing and wonderful and beautiful world. Thank you, Lord, that you haven't given us no answers, but you've given us a Bible that contains a history and a guide for science and understanding, a Bible that tells about you, but also tells about your creation. Thank you, Father, for being merciful to us. You could have cast us off to the side and left us in a gutter, but no, Lord, you didn't. For many of us, you opened up our eyes to your truths. And for those in here who haven't had their eyes open, Lord, I pray that you would slap them upside the head and show them that there's more to this world than meets the eye. And Father, forgive us for not having studied as much as we ought to. And Father, forgive us for not having been brave enough to talk to those people that when you're tugging at us, say, hey, go talk to that person. We said, no, I'm afraid, I can't do it. Lord, forgive us for that. But Lord, in the future, encourage us, embolden us, Father, so that we would not take that light and put it under a bushel, but we would let that light of faith shine in us. Use us, Lord, for your glory and for your kingdom and for your ends. And amen. Thank you all very much.
All right, so we have times for some question and answers. We're going to take up a quick offering, though, real quick, if you guys want to come on down. So again, if you're making out checks tonight, please make those out to Cedar Park. All this gets turned over directly to Cedar Park, who have been very gracious in hosting these events for us, which we think are very, very important. Cedar Park's just an awesome church. If you are looking for a church home, I mean, this is just a fantastic ministry, a church that's involved in education, and it's a rare thing to find today. So not only do they have the Christian schools, but they open their doors up for educational programs. Ron? Missed one down here. Someone was trying to wave you down. There you go. Please help us out as much as you can, though, because speakers like this are difficult to afford to bring to town, but we're doing our best to bring them in, bring you some top-notch speakers. When we get to the end of the question and answer session, I'll remind you again about the speakers we have coming up in October and December. We are scheduled all the way through March at this point, though, with speakers, so we're pretty close to that. Okay, so we can open it up for question and answers. I'll bring the mic around, so please wait for me to get there, because people can't hear you. Even if Dr. Carter can hear you, people do that. They know that they're close enough to fire a question directly from there, and so they try to do that. But remember, we need the mic on you for people in the audience to hear you and those that might be tuned in. Again, we're doing these through live webcast, so just raise your hand if you have a question. I'll bring the mic around.
But before the first question comes out, I want to lay down some rules. First of all, I don't necessarily know all the doctrinal positions of this church, and I do not want to be tempted to contradict anything that might be taught from this pulpit. That would be unfair of me. So if you ask me a question about end times theology or the role of men and women or predestination versus free will or Bible translations, I'm not going to answer the question. Okay? Make sure it's a question. Make sure it has a question mark at the end of it. Keep it short. And don't tell me anything that God taught you in a dream. Because it's happened before. That's why I had to say that. Okay. We're not going to go forever either. My time, it's 11:08 p.m. I'm still on Eastern time. That makes it 8:08, right? We're closing at 8:30. That's 22 minutes from now, we will stop, I promise you. And I'll be back there until the cows come home answering the rest of your questions. Okay, sir, you got the first question. Hit me.
Setup question. Do evolutionists acknowledge genetic entropy?
Evolutionists do not generally acknowledge genetic entropy. Even though it comes straight out of evolutionary literature, even though we've quoted evolutionist after evolutionist, even though we base this idea on Haldane, even though we wrote, and I say we, creationists, wrote the most sophisticated evolutionary modeling program ever. It's called Mendel's Accountant. You can get it online. It is directly designed to test theories of genetic entropy. And based on evolutionary ideas and evolutionary mathematics, we cannot get species to evolve upwards. We always have an increase in mutations, a decrease in fitness, and eventual extinction. Unless you do something ridiculous, like give every human female 800 children, and 798 of them die for natural selection, then maybe it'll work, but no. So they generally ignore the question.
So when faced with genetic entropy, do they just deny it altogether? Or if they do acknowledge it to some extent, how do they explain what we see with the increased complexity of life forms as they would propose?
Well, those who do acknowledge it, not all of them say that they have an answer. There's a famous geneticist. He wrote an article and is published in the evolutionary literature. He called The Accumulation of Deleterious Mutations. Why have we not died 100 times over? Or 1,000 times over? 100 times over? Now, that's a very interesting paper because he didn't actually have an answer. There's another famous guy named Mike Lynch. I really love listening to his talks. He's an evolutionist, but he lays stuff out. He says, this is hard. I mean, there are some gigantic problems, and they're mathematical problems. And the problem is that evolution is not measured in time. It's measured in generations. And if you take 6 million years to a common ancestor with chimpanzees, 30-year average generation time for humans and about 27 for chimpanzees today, you go back, there's only about 200,000 generations. In 200,000 generations, you've got to generate 35 million single-letter differences between the human and chimpanzee genomes, tens of thousands of genomic rearrangements, and you have to invent about 700 genes that are found in humans and not chimpanzees. And you can't do it in 200,000 generations. Mathematically, it doesn't work. And then you add the problems of the accumulation of mutations and a decrease in fitness. And what they say is, oh, you just don't understand evolution. But actually, I think we do understand it very well. And we're testing it with their own theory. Oh, there's so much more. I could talk for days on just that. Sir?
A while back, the evolutionists were arguing about the word kind used in the Bible, basically in Genesis 1, and saying that's not a scientific definition of anything, but it actually relates to a species or a type, as you kind of led, and the bell went off in my head. You know, that's what the Bible's talking about. Is there a better way to describe that word kind, perhaps? I mean, it's pretty obvious, I think, but anyway, that's kind of what my question's about.
Okay, I'll do my best. The Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, says God created the great creatures of the sea after their kind, birds that catered into their kind, cattle after their kind. It uses this word kind 10 times. Evolutionists talk about species. The Bible talks about kinds. Are those the same thing? The answer is no. The Bible basically says God created independent groups of animals that are designed to reproduce within themselves and not reproduce with other animals. But he didn't tell us where the dividing line was. Well, okay, dogs and cats can't reproduce. That's a pretty good indication of different kinds. But lions and tigers, in fact, all members of genus Panthera can interbreed. And all the other interbreeding things I showed you between genera, those are pretty good indications of the created kinds. But the word species has no definition either. You see, if there's a range of mountains that separates two herds of caribou, population geneticists will treat them as two different species. If they're not interbreeding, they don't care if they can interbreed or not. If they're not interbreeding, they have different evolutionary trajectories. And yet, biologists talk about hybridization. If they can hybridize and have fertile offspring, they're the same species, and geologists talk about something different. So they can argue all they want about kind. No, it's not a scientific definition. But science is based on philosophy. You need an overarching guide to thought, or science cannot progress at all. And the Bible gives us a guide. It gives us some ideas. God did this and this and this and this, and then we can go out and explore it. But it goes on from that. I rambled there, but I tried to answer as best I could. But basically saying, okay, the word kind is not a scientific definition, but species is not a scientific definition either. Now, it's not a Tucoca argument. That's not saying, oh yeah, well, you're wrong also. It doesn't make me right because you're wrong, right? That's a bad argument. What it is, look, no one has a definition of these things, and it's left to us to go out and explore and see where the dividing line is. And most creationists think that the dividing line is somewhere at the level of family. So sheep and goats are one created kind. In fact, the Bible has a word sheep, a word goat, and a word sheep or goat. And some species of sheep, some breeds of sheep, and some breeds of goat can interbreed. Oh, wow, they are one created kind. But then after that, man, people are working really hard to find out where those boundaries are. It's actually a really interesting and amazing science, but we haven't figured them all out yet. Anyway, ramble. Sir?
I'm going to try to set this up the best I can.
Okay.
But first of all, do you believe in a literal translation of Genesis?
By the word literal.
Literal as in...
Well, the word literal is problematic. Because literally, the Bible says that God is an all-consuming fire. But God's not fire. Literally, the Bible says that David is like a signet on God's right hand. But David is not a ring wrapped around God who doesn't have a physical hand. So there's poetic expression. What we have to do is take the correct genre and put the words into the proper historical and grammatical context. So wooden literalism is wrong, but taking something out of context is also wrong. So when I look at Genesis reads like historical literature. When you see that sentence usage and that phraseology and the way of writing, that same exact stuff reappears in like Chronicles and Kings, the historical books. There's not poetry in Genesis. There's not prophecy in Genesis. It reads like historical narrative. Okay, so that's my answer. Go.
So generally my question is going to be about if 24-hour days are exactly what it's talking about, and if death entered the world right when Adam sinned. And basically my situation that I'm proposing, I talked to my grandpa about this earlier today, is that if animals couldn't be predators before the fall because no death had to be involved, then a Bengal tiger, for example, would have to be drastically different from its vegetarian counterpart from Genesis.
Okay, you're asking 3 questions. They're all excellent questions. The third one is very difficult to answer. Okay, ready? Are they literal days? It's an old creationist thing that some of my friends in Australia say. They say, back in the day, it took 5 days to drive across the outback during the day. Well, that's 3 different usages of the word day. Each one of them, based on context, has a definite meaning. So the word day has this much range of meaning, but 3 different usages, you can actually tell exactly what they meant. It meant that back in my father's time, it took 3 calendar days to drive across the outback, only driving during daylight. So when we take that thought, apply it to Genesis. Evening and morning the first day, evening and morning the second day, evening and morning the third day, evening and morning the fourth day. It says it 6 times. As if, just in case we're missing the definition of the word day, it defines it 6 times in a row. So I know millions of years is tempting. I have tried all sorts of, literally, before I came to this, I didn't want to become a creationist. I did not want to. But before I came here, I tried every possible way I could think of adding millions of years to Scripture. One of them, the first one was, well, maybe each of the days of Genesis was really a long period of time. But that means that God created plants millions of years before he created the sun. The order of events is all wrong in Genesis for evolutionary theory. Okay, did I answer the second question also just there? I don't even remember what it was. Okay, third one, the origin of carnivory. Mosquitoes. Sharks. 3 possible answers. Different creationists, in fact, one of my very good friends who I share an office with, he goes to a different one than I do first. I don't like his answer first, I go to my answer first, but this order. Knowing that God knows everything and knows the future. When he created life, he knew what was going to happen after Adam sinned. So he pre-knew the fall and put into creatures things that they would require after the fall. 2, mutation plus natural selection. It's all about reproduction. That female mosquito who gets a blood meal can lay millions of eggs. Male mosquitoes don't drink blood, they sip flower nectar. It looks like mosquitoes were flower hawks at first. And something happened, and selection amplified this ability to suck blood. Or 3, this is actually another example of 2, what's called exaptation. Not adaptation, but exaptation. Taking something and using it for a use that it wasn't originally designed for. Let me give you an example. If the Bible is true, all bears descended from 2 bears that came off of Noah's Ark. So there's the Asiatic sun bear, black bears, brown bears, and polar bears, and a couple other bears. They all came from 2 bears. What do black bears eat? When they can't get into garbage cans, what do black bears eat? Fruits and berries and roots and stuff, right? What do brown bears eat? Or during the salmon run, we've all seen the pictures, right? They eat salmon and they eat little animals, but they also eat a lot of plant material. They're very omnivorous. What do polar bears eat? Seals. They do eat some plant material during the springtime, but it's like less than 1% of their diet. So we have within bears, they all have the same tools. They got the same claws. One uses them for plants, one uses it for seals, and an occasional person. That's called exaptation. Using a tool that the Bible says would have been designed for plants in a different way. And it just lets them survive in an environment that they would not be able to survive in otherwise. If you go to our website on our frequently asked questions, that we have categorized lists, and one of them is the origin of bad things. And carnivory is there, suffering is there, parasitism is there. It's actually, theologians have been discussing this for thousands of years. It's not a new thought. And there are several different ways to answer it. I just gave you a couple. And it's really a fun topic. But I don't think I have a good answer. It just is. I know my God is good. I know my God is kind, just, and loving. I know my God is righteous. I don't look at the fossil record and say, how could a good and loving God have created that? 'Cause that's what Charles Darwin did. But he's looking at a fossil record that was produced during Noah's flood. And the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6 that the whole earth was corrupt before God. And he sent the flood to destroy the earth. And he says all flesh is corrupted their way on the earth. It includes animals, not just people. He sent a flood to destroy everything. All those things that were caught up in the flood and buried and then preserved in rocks turned into fossils. Well, guess what? The fossil record should reflect a very violent world. It was so violent that God decided to destroy it. But that does not reflect the world that God originally created, that fell into corruption when Adam rebelled against God, and that requires a Redeemer, Jesus Christ, who not only redeems people, but is going to come back to this earth, burn this all up, and restart from scratch with no more sin and no more death. That's the biblical picture. Okay, I'm rambling again. I can talk forever. Yes, who's got the mic? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, I learned years back that Shem, Ham, and Japheth were the originators of the three races.
Okay, I cannot hear you. You have to hold it closer and talk real clear.
Okay, I heard years back that Shem, Ham, and Japheth, sons of Noah, started the three different races, Negroid, Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and that genetics can explain how they could have evolved into, natural selection, etc., the three races. As we see, though, the more intermarriage, I understand, they do, the more we will all become olive-toned and brown-eyed and black-haired. So give me some genetics on that.
Okay. The origin of races is a very interesting subject of study. It happens to be my specialty. I spend enormous amounts of time staring at genetic data, writing computer programs, analyzing that data, and I am actively working with several other people trying to build a biblical model to explain people today, just starting with Adam and Eve. I think absolutely we can do it. Now the question is, what about races? Shem, Ham, and Japheth were not the originators of the so-called three races, because first of all, there are no races. The genetic difference between Africans, Europeans, and Asians is minor, and we share 99.9% of the variations are found in all major world populations. What separates us is minor. Things like blue eyes are only found in Europe. In fact, blue eyes are only found where the Vikings invaded in the Middle Ages. Red hair is only found in Scotland and Ireland. Those are mutations that occurred in Europe late in history. Sickle cell anemia, is that one trait is only found in Central Africa. It's a mutation. So what separates us is a little bit of mutations, and what unites us is amazing. But three, biblically, after Noah's flood, it says, the sons of Noah who came forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and from these the whole earth was populated. I messed it up at the end there. But it says, three men, their wives, are the originators of all of humankind. But would you not expect before the Tower of Babel, when there was one language and one culture, and they were purposely staying together, would you not expect the sons of Ham to marry the daughters of Shem? And the sons of Shem to marry the daughters of Japheth? Yeah. And so the population would have been mixed until the Tower of Babel. And when you look at where the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth went, Ham settled in Turkey. Lydia, the seller of purple in the New Testament, her name descends from the province of Lydia, which is probably named after Lud, the Hamite. Ham also settled in Mesopotamia because Nimrod, the first king of the Mesopotamia area, he was a Hamite. Plus the Canaanites in Canaan land, present-day Israel. Those are all Hamitic descent. And then you had Cush and Mizraim, Mizraim being Egypt, M-I-Z-R, in Africa. But Northern Africans are not the same as Southern Africans. Northern Africans have a very Mediterranean type of genetics. The Bible does not describe where Europeans, Chinese, Australian Aboriginals, Native Americans, or Southern Africans come from. And that's where genetics comes in. So no, Shem, Ham, and Japheth do not explain the races, but it's a fun topic. Oh, I wish I could talk more.
Doesn't it explain some in your DVD? Do you go into that a little more in your DVD?
In my DVD, Mitochondrial Eve and the Three Daughters of Noah,
Yeah, a little bit.
I absolutely go through some of that.
Yeah.
Are we finished?
I think we're pretty close. We might could take one more, but it'd have to be a short answer. Oh, Alex, I don't know. But it'd have to be a quick one. Something not big, small.
In the debate with Ken Ham, Bill Nye proposed that there is not enough time for speciation since Noah's flood. How do you answer Bill Nye's charge?
In the Ken Ham, Bill Nye debate, Bill Nye said there's not enough time for speciation since Noah's flood. But Bill Nye was assuming that speciation happens slowly. He's assuming that natural selection and variation occur, and it takes millions of years to change things. The creationists have come up with all sorts of different arguments. One is called pluripotent baranomes. All sorts of things. Basically this. Most creationists believe the species change very, very quickly after the initial creation because God put a lot of diversity into those species. And after the flood, you took one species and you divided it up and spread it across the planet. Well, they're all going to change in different ways, which is why we have all these different types of bears, for example. But today, because all that diversity has been lost and species have specialized, they've actually been pigeonholed, where all the ability to do this and this and this is not in this species anymore, and they've actually lost their ability to change as fast as they used to. It's how fast the species appear. If I would have been tempted if I had thought, and I didn't, I wouldn't have because I wasn't there. But if I was smart, I would have said, but don't you know, Mr. Nye, that you evolutionists have seen species appear and disappear in a single season? And when I would have pointed him to the work of Peter and Rosemary Grant, two very dedicated evolutionists who have spent every summer in the Galapagos Islands for 36 years or something on a little island, and they've captured every bird on that island every year, and they know all the history of the birds, and what they've shown was that during the El Nino years when there's lots of rain, what they thought were two species hybridized like crazy. And in the La Nina years where it's really dry, the birds with the middle-sized beaks die, and the ones with the big beaks live because they can eat the cactus seeds, and some of the birds with little beaks live because they can find the little seeds. And so they separate into two species again in 1 year. That's evolutionists doing that. So what's a species? How fast a species form? Two open questions. You can't even answer the question. But I wish I was actually up there because I could have done a much better job defending evolution than Bill Nye did. I don't think he knows anything about evolution. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Thank you all. You're wonderful. I'll be praying that God will continue to bless this church to be a light in this community with powerful arguments and draw people here so they can bend their knees and accept Jesus Christ as their Savior.
Okay, I'm going to close out with a few announcements. Dr. Carter, if you want to stay up there, you can go ahead and unplug your laptop and leave your mic on. I'll let you close us in a word of prayer. This is just going to take me like 1 minute. Okay, I just want to remind everyone what's coming up next month. We got Bruce Barton's going to be here to do a talk on dinosaurs. Woo-hoo. So if you don't know how dinosaurs fit into it all, this is a really common question. You can talk about the flood and the fossil record and all that stuff, and then people still come back and say, "Oh, how the dinosaurs fit in?" I've had at 2 different talks on astronomy, I've had someone come up afterwards and ask, what about the dinosaurs, So if you don't know how it fits in, that'll be probably a very interesting talk for you. Dr. Vardaman, who was a research scientist with the Institute for Creation Research for many, many years, is going to be here in December to do a talk on the climate during the post-flood ice age. The ice age
I highly encourage you to come here, Dr. Larry. He's awesome.
No one more of an expert on this particular subject than Dr. Vardaman. He's also an expert on radiometric dating, so we may very well have him come back later to tackle that very complex topic on radiometric dating. I just also wanted to point out that I'm now doing a Sunday school class here as well. So if you attend Cedar Park as your regular church, or if you want to sneak in for Sunday school, I'm offering a Sunday school class now. It's the room number that you can see there, HS206 is actually a room in the high school building over there. But Sunday mornings at 9 a.m., I will be doing a 6-week class. This first one's on flood geology, but I will offer it each quarter, the first Sunday beginning of each quarter, on a different subject. So first starting with flood geology, how fossils fit into the global flood. Then the first Sunday in December, I will switch over to start talking about biological design versus Darwinism. First Sunday in March, I will switch over to start talking about creation astronomy. First Sunday in June, biblical archaeology. And we'll keep repeating like that each quarter with a different emphasis. So we can get into a subject in a little more depth that way. Okay? Lots of ways you can help us. If we're trying to do a good job here in getting these apologetics programs underway and bring speakers back each month. And so if you want to get involved a little further, that's great. You can go in and check out our website where we got lots and lots of materials there as well. nwcreation.net is our website. And remember, if you can't make it on any given month, these are being webcast. So all you got to do is go onto the Cedar Park website or go into nwcreation.net, find the symposiums page, and you will find the link on either of those. We want you coming out in person, but in the event that you can't make it out, webcast is a live webcast feed, so feel free to log in there as well. All right? Dr. Clark, could you close out in a word of prayer?
I'd love to. Lord God, take this group of people here and encourage them that there are answers. Lord, bless those who are members here to be thriving members of a vibrant community. Lord, help us all as we seek to serve you, not to be ashamed of the gospel. Help us all, Father, to spend time in your word so we can grasp these deep things. And help us, Lord, to be brave to speak to other people. Lord, we do love you. And for those of us here who are not Christians, Lord, have mercy on them like you have mercy on the rest of us. And Father, help us who are Christians to be merciful and gentle to those who are not, and yet to stand firm and deliberately answer the questions that we're given for your glory and your honor and for the advancement of your kingdom here on this earth. Amen.
Amen.